Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Mindy here today for Lawn Fawn, and in today's video we are going to be creating a friendship reveal wheel card using the square reveal wheel add-on. I'm going to start out by Copic coloring my images, so I will be using the Stud Puffin stamp set and also the Yeti or Not stamp set. I used the two Yetis and some of the trees. I went ahead and stamped these images out onto Lawn Fawn white cardstock using the Lawn Fawn jet black ink, which is Copic friendly. I will have all of the colors that I'm using listed at the top of the screen. What I showed here is my start of coloring the Yetis. I'm using C2 and C0 for my colors, just adding soft little flicks from the sides and a little bit under the arms. That was with the C2. And then I'm blending that out with a C0. I am not adding a lot of color to these. I'm really leaving the majority of the Yetis white. So just adding that little bit of shading on the side to give the Yetis a little bit of dimension. For the face, I thought about coloring them blue like I normally would, but being my card is a lot of pink colors, I decided to go with some peachy tones. So I used the E04, E11, and E01. And then for the horns on the Yetis, I really tried to make a rainbow out of this, which was very, very tiny stripes. You can see it kind of better in the card in the pictures. The only color I didn't make in was the purple, but in close-up, they are super cute in rainbow colors. Now for the trees, I colored all the base of the trees with an E15, not blending it with any other color, just the straight E15. And to do the trees themselves, I like to turn my cardstock upside down because then I can flick down with my colors. And then quickly coloring in the Stud Puffin. So I have the colors listed there at the very top. I kind of made it, these are neutral grays. You could color them in blues or pinks, whatever color you would prefer. And then a little bit on the belly for a little bit of shading and a rosy cheek. Now once I have everything colored in, I'm going to take the coordinating dies, line them up with each of my images and hold them in place with some post-it tape, and then run this through my die cut machine. And I will have to go through a couple times to die cut out all of those trees. Then I'll set those off to the side and work on my background. So I have once again the Lawn Fawn white cardstock, and I will be ink blending spun sugar, picked raspberry, and festive berries. I know I only need the top part of this card ink blended, so I'm starting kind of in the middle with my lightest color, which is the spun sugar. So I will add a layer of that. Then I will come in with the picked raspberry, laying down a little bit of that color. And then I will top it off with the festive berries just to add some contrast to the background. And I will continue to go over this ink blending to really make it a smooth transition. I do go over it a few times. Some of it I did edit out of the video because it can take me a little while to give it a really nice smooth blend. And once I'm happy with that ink blending, I'm also going to take another piece of white cardstock, and this is the one I'm going to die cut out the actual wheel from. I want the window to match my background. So I had kind of started it with the spun sugar, and I'm going to go around on top of it, actually, I'm sorry, with the picked raspberry. The spun sugar was a little lower on my card, so I thought starting with the picked raspberry would be a better match. And then I will go around that picked raspberry with the festive berries so that I can die cut this with the reveal wheel die, and that will be my window where my sentiments are going to be. I need to ink blend this now because the ink is going to be wet on my cardstock for a little while, and I want to make sure that this is completely dry before I stamp my sentiments because I will be heat embossing them. So I want to make sure I give this plenty of time to dry. Then I can take my square window add-on, add that into the little notch there held in place with some tape, and then I can die cut out my reveal wheel front panel from this ink blended piece. Once I have that die cut, I'm going to add some sparkle to the background. So I am taking the liquid stardust and I'm shaking this up really, really well. I'm going to add a couple drops onto my mat along with a few spritzes of water. I'm going to mix that up really well, and then I'm going to flick this all over my background. And that will just give a lot of sparkle to my skies for my front panel. After this has dried, I'm going to take the Just Stitching hearts, and I'm using all but one. I didn't use the biggest one. I'm going to line this up on the front panel, hold these each in place with some Post-it tape, and run that through the die cut machine. So these are just adding the stitching. They're not going to actually die cut the hearts. And since I had my craft sheet out here, I'm going to do some quick ink blending. I die cut 3 hills using the stitched hillside die. They're all different sizes, so they're going to layer up on the front of my card. And I'm just using some of the ink that's still left over on my brush, a little bit. I think it was the picked raspberry, just to add a little bit of that to the top of each hill. Now I wanted to give you a close-up look of what the stitched hearts look like on the background. So I'm going to bring that up here close for you, and you'll be able to see the sparkle and the blended background and those really cute stitched hearts there. I just love that little bit of detail that it adds. Then I did go ahead and die cut out this frame for my square window, and I just attached that with some liquid glue. And I kind of have my hills lined up there. They're not attached yet. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't need to do any extra trimming. So once I was happy with the size of everything, I went ahead and added that with a tape runner. And then I can start getting my front panel together. I wanted to make sure this was all complete before I work on any other part of the assembly. So I'm going to lay out exactly where my trees and Yetis and my little stud puffin are going to go. And once I'm happy with that placement, I'll go ahead and add the trees onto the background with the liquid glue. You can tuck them behind the hills. I'm just kind of placing mine right behind the critters. And then I placed some foam tape, some foam squares behind the Yetis and the stud puffin to give them a little bit of dimension. So I'll go ahead and remove the backing of those foam squares and then attach them to the front of my card. And now I will move on to working on my actual reveal wheel. So here's that ink blended panel. I'm going to die cut out that reveal wheel piece. And then I did take after it with my heat tool to just make sure that this was really nice and dry. And one thing I want to kind of give a tip is, if you do this, if you're ink blending an entire wheel, I would suggest cutting another one from just regular white cardstock and layering this up. If you kind of go after it with a heat tool like I did, it warped it a little bit, which made it a little difficult to turn, and you'll see that in the end. But I kind of wanted to just point that out. You might want to attach another piece for stability. Now all I'm doing here is I'm taking some embossing powder and just sprinkling that on. If the embossing powder was sticking, then I knew my wheel wasn't dry enough yet. But since it was just sliding right off, I know I'm ready to emboss. So I'm taking the square template, holding that in place with some Post-it tape, and then I can stamp my images. So I'll prep this with an anti-static powder tool, just help remove any of that static that might be there. And then using the Love Poems stamp set, I'm going to take off the sentiments that I know I'm going to use. So one I'll place on the block right away. The other two I'm actually going to put on the lid there so I know where they are and I can see them and find them quickly, because I do want to move quickly. The embossing ink does stay sticky for a little while, so I have a little bit of wiggle room, but just keeping them out makes it really handy and makes this go pretty quick. So I'm just inking up that first sentiment with the embossing ink, stamping that down, and then I'll just quickly remove that and move on to my next sentiment. And I'll continue around the wheel, which these templates make it so nice and easy to line these up. And then once I have all my sentiments stamped out, I can remove that template carefully. I'll take off the Post-it tape and just kind of peel the template back. And then I can sprinkle on the white embossing powder. So just turn the wheel and catch all of those. Now if there's any embossing powder sticking, you can wipe it away with your finger or with a paintbrush. And then I'm just going to hit that with my heat tool till it's melted. And I will take a Swiffer cloth and just kind of buffer off any extra powder that might have stuck from the anti-static powder tool. So I'm taking my brad now. I already die cut that smaller circle base. I'm going to pop that through to the front and open the brad. I'm going to make sure that those prongs are kind of in between the sentiments. I don't want them peeking through my window where my sentiments are. And then I can flip that over and add some small foam squares around that small wheel base. And remove the backing of those, and then lining up my sentiments in the window, making sure that they all are placed properly. Once I'm happy with that, I'll go ahead and attach this to my card base that I already had die cut from white cardstock using the reveal wheel die. And just giving this a test run. Now you can't tell here that the wheel itself is kind of warped from me heat embossing it, but once I attach it to the actual card base, you'll be able to tell. So I definitely suggest cutting an extra one for that stability. So now I'm just going to go around the card, add in my foam squares, take off the backing, and then I can attach my front panel to that back panel. So now to create my card base, I'm going to be using raspberry cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to attach a piece of Ballet Slippers cardstock that is 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm just attaching that with a tape runner. And then I can go ahead and add my front panel on. Now it was right about this point that I realized I did not put an arrow or anything there, so I'm going to try and stamp this in here real careful off on the side. I'm using that little sentiment off of the You're Just My Type stamp set. And I did have a little bit of embossing powder there, so I'm just taking my little picker tool and I kind of just scraped it away, and you can't even tell that that was there. So like I said, right about here is when I'm realizing that my wheel was a little warped from when I was drying the ink blending that I had done. So once again, like I said, just adding that little, that extra one in the back for some stability. I can still turn it, but it just took a little bit of work. I still think it turned out great and cute, and this would make a really great friendship card to give to somebody, even when using some of these Valentine products. Friendship cards are always great to send out. I hope you enjoyed today's card and it inspires you to create. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.